The first European sailors who reached this isolated island on Easter Sunday, April 5th, 1722, thought they had discovered the edge of the known world. Rising silently from the volcanic earth were enormous stone faces, staring across the landscape with expressions that seemed frozen somewhere between wisdom and warning. There were no towering forests, no great cities, and no obvious explanation for who had carved these colossal figures, or why. Even more unsettling, many of the statues appeared to be watching the ocean, as if waiting for something that had never arrived. Centuries later, satellites, archaeologists, and advanced technology have answered some questions, yet the island continues to guard secrets that refuse to die. Because the greatest mystery was never how these giant heads were built, it was why an entire civilization devoted its existence to creating them.
The island known today as Rapa Nui, or Easter Island, lies in one of the most remote places on Earth. Located in the southeastern Pacific Ocean, it sits nearly 2,300 miles, 3,700 kilometers west of Chile, and over 1,200 miles, 2,000 kilometers from the nearest inhabited island. This extraordinary isolation made the island almost impossible to reach for ancient sailors, making its history even more astonishing. Archaeological evidence suggests that Polynesian navigators first arrived here sometime between AD 1150 and 1250, crossing thousands of miles of open ocean using only stars, ocean currents, and wind patterns as their guides. What they discovered was a small volcanic island with limited resources, but somehow, within a few centuries, they transformed it into one of humanity's greatest engineering mysteries.
Scattered across the island stand nearly 1,000 massive stone statues, known as Moai. Some measure over 30 feet tall, while the largest unfinished statue would have reached almost 70 feet and weighed more than 150 tons. For generations, travelers believed they were simply giant stone heads buried in the ground. But modern excavations revealed something astonishing. Hidden beneath the surface are complete bodies, carefully carved torsos, folded arms, intricate petroglyphs, and details that remained invisible for centuries. The famous heads are only the visible portion of monuments that were intentionally set deep into the earth, creating one of archaeology's most misunderstood images. The deeper researchers investigated, the stranger the story became. Every statue was carved from volcanic rock at the same quarry, yet hundreds somehow ended up scattered across every corner of the island, without wheels, cranes, or metal tools. Even more mysterious, almost all of them faced inland instead of toward the sea, as though silently watching over the people rather than the ocean surrounding them. Then came an even bigger discovery. These statues were never random works of art. They represented powerful ancestors whose spiritual presence was believed to protect entire communities. But if they were symbols of protection, what terrifying event caused nearly every one of them to be deliberately pulled down? That question would uncover a story of ambition, rivalry, survival, and a civilization that may have destroyed itself while trying to honor its past.
Long before the first European ship appeared on the horizon, the people of Rapa Nui had already created a society unlike any other in the Pacific. Villages were organized around powerful family clans, each competing to demonstrate its influence through increasingly larger moai. These statues were not idols to be worshipped. Instead, they represented deceased chiefs and respected ancestors, whose spirits, known in Polynesian belief as mana, were thought to continue protecting their descendants. The taller and more impressive the statue, the greater the prestige of the clan that commissioned it. What began as a spiritual tradition slowly transformed into a fierce competition, where every new monument had to surpass the last.
Without realizing it, the islanders had started a race that demanded enormous amounts of labor, resources, and sacrifice. The heart of this incredible operation was the volcanic crater known as Rano Raraku, where nearly every moai was carved directly into compressed volcanic ash called tuff. Walking through the quarry today feels like entering a frozen construction site abandoned centuries ago. More than 400 unfinished statues remain exactly where ancient craftsmen left them, some still attached to the bedrock, others standing partially buried along the slopes. Stone carving tools made from hard basalt have also been discovered, proving that the builders shaped these massive figures without metal. Every strike had to be perfectly controlled because a single mistake could crack months of work beyond repair. Yet despite these primitive tools, the carvings display remarkable precision, symmetry, and consistency that continue to impress modern engineers.
But carving the statues was only the beginning. The greatest mystery was moving them across an island filled with volcanic hills and rough terrain. Some moai weighed more than 80 tons and traveled distances of over 10 miles, 16 kilometers, from the quarry to ceremonial stone platforms called ahu. For centuries, no one could explain how this was possible. Early European visitors imagined enormous wooden rollers, while others believed advanced lost civilizations or even extraterrestrials must have been involved. Then, in 2012, archaeologists Dr. Carl Lipo and Dr. Terry Hunt demonstrated an astonishing possibility. Using ropes and coordinated teams pulling from different directions, they successfully moved a replica moai upright in a rocking motion. Instead of being dragged, the statues could actually walk forward, matching ancient Rapa Nui legends that claimed the moai reached their destinations through spiritual power. Yet the walking statues solved only one mystery, while creating another. If the islanders possessed such extraordinary engineering skills, why were so many moai abandoned halfway to their destinations? Why were hundreds left unfinished inside the quarry? And why, after generations of dedicating their lives to building these colossal guardians, did the people suddenly stop? Something dramatic had changed on Rapa Nui. The silence surrounding those abandoned statues suggests that the island's greatest project did not end in celebration. It ended in crisis. And the clues to that catastrophe were hidden not in the stone faces themselves, but in the landscape that surrounded them. For more than a century, one explanation dominated books, documentaries, and classrooms around the world. According to this theory, the people of Rapa Nui had destroyed their own paradise. To transport larger and larger moai, they supposedly cut down every tree on the island. As the forests disappeared, the soil eroded, crops failed, birds vanished, and the civilization collapsed into starvation and violence. This idea became famous after author Jared Diamond described Easter Island as a warning about environmental destruction in his 2005 book, Collapse. It was a powerful story, a civilization so obsessed with building monuments that it accidentally engineered its own extinction. But the more archaeologists investigated, the more cracks appeared in that dramatic narrative. Excavations conducted throughout the late 20th and early 21st centuries painted a far more complicated picture. Scientists found evidence that the island's giant palm forests had indeed disappeared, but not necessarily because humans recklessly cut down every tree. Another unexpected suspect emerged: the Polynesian rat, accidentally brought to the island by the first settlers around AD 1200. With no natural predators, the rats multiplied rapidly and fed on millions of palm seeds before they could grow into new trees. Researchers discovered countless fossilized palm nuts bearing the unmistakable tooth marks of rodents. Instead of a single catastrophic act of deforestation, the island may have experienced a slow ecological decline caused by both human activity and an invasive species working together over several centuries.
Even more surprising was the evidence for survival. Archaeologists uncovered sophisticated farming techniques that allowed the Rapa Nui people to adapt to increasingly difficult conditions. They covered fields with broken volcanic rocks to trap moisture, reduce soil erosion, and regulate temperature, a method now known as lithic mulching. They also built circular stone gardens that protected crops from powerful Pacific winds. These innovations suggest that the islanders were not simply destroying their environment, they were actively trying to save it. Rather than helpless victims of their own mistakes, they appeared to be remarkably skilled problem solvers, fighting against challenges that continued to grow with each passing generation.
Then another chapter of the mystery emerged, one written not by nature, but by outsiders. On April 5, 1722, Dutch explorer Jacob Roggeveen became the first European known to land on the island. His journals described the towering Moai, but also noted a population far smaller than many researchers expected. In the decades that followed, Spanish and British expeditions arrived, including the voyage of Captain James Cook in 1774. By the 19th century, foreign diseases, violent conflicts, and devastating Peruvian slave raids in 1862 had reduced the island's population to only a tiny fraction of its former size. Entire family lines vanished, ancient traditions were interrupted, and knowledge passed down for generations disappeared with them. Suddenly, the mystery of the fallen Moai looked very different. Perhaps the statues were not simply monuments abandoned after ecological collapse. Perhaps they were silent witnesses to centuries of hardship, adaptation, and finally, outside devastation. But one question remained untouched. If these stone giants truly represented powerful ancestors, why had almost every one of them been deliberately pulled down? The answer lay in an ancient civil war, one that transformed sacred guardians into the casualties of a society fighting for its very survival. By the late 1600s and early 1700s, Rapa Nui was no longer the thriving society that had spent centuries raising colossal ancestors across the island. Resources had become increasingly scarce, rival clans competed for survival, and old political alliances began to fracture. Archaeological evidence suggests that conflict spread between communities, and with every battle, the sacred symbols of rival families became targets. The Moai that had once stood proudly upon their Ahu platforms were no longer untouchable. One after another, they were deliberately pulled forward, crashing face first onto the volcanic ground. This was not the work of earthquakes or natural disasters. It was an intentional act, an attempt to destroy the spiritual authority and prestige of competing clans. Today, archaeologists estimate that by the mid-1800s, nearly every standing Moai on the island had been toppled. Many statues still bear the scars of that violent period, their broken necks and shattered faces lying exactly where they fell centuries ago. Yet, remarkably, most were not smashed into countless pieces. This suggests the goal was not to erase the ancestors forever, but to strip them of their spiritual power. Across Polynesian cultures, damaging a sacred figure was believed to weaken the mana associated with it. By bringing down an enemy's Moai, a victorious clan symbolically defeated both its rivals and the protective spirits watching over them. Then, almost as suddenly as the age of the Moai ended, a completely different belief system appeared. Archaeologists discovered evidence of a ritual known as the Tangata Manu, or Birdman Cult, centered at the ceremonial village of Orongo on the rim of the Rano Raraku volcano. Instead of proving power through larger stone statues, leaders now competed in a dangerous annual contest. Champions climbed down nearly vertical cliffs, swam through shark-filled waters to the offshore islet of Motu Nui, and waited for the first sooty tern to lay an egg. Whoever returned first with an unbroken egg on their head earned victory for their sponsor, who became the island's spiritual leader for the following year. The shift was extraordinary. The island had abandoned centuries of monument building and embraced an entirely new path to authority.
For generations, outsiders viewed Easter Island as the tragic story of a civilization that mysteriously vanished. But modern archaeology tells a different story. The Rapa Nui people never disappeared. Despite famine, conflict, disease, slave raids, and colonization, their descendants survived. Their language, traditions, and cultural identity remain alive today. Since the 1950s, many fallen Moai have been carefully restored to their platforms through major archaeological conservation projects, allowing these ancient guardians to stand once again after centuries of silence. Each restored statue reminds the world that the people who created them were far more sophisticated than early explorers ever imagined.
Yet one final mystery refuses to fade. The Moai may no longer be seen as impossible engineering feats, and many questions about their purpose have finally been answered. But scattered across Rano Raraku, hundreds of unfinished giants remain frozen in stone, as though their creators simply walked away and never returned. Some are only rough outlines, others are nearly complete, forever trapped inside the volcanic rock that gave them life. They stand as silent evidence that whatever happened on Rapa Nui, it happened suddenly enough to stop one of history's most extraordinary construction projects in its tracks. And even today, those unfinished faces continue to stare into eternity, guarding secrets that may never be fully uncovered.